On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. My name is Don, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies manage complexity and increase performance. I also wanted to just take a brief moment as well and announce that Life Science Success Podcast and the B-Fuse podcast are now a part of the D3 or D Cubed digital media company. And so for anybody that wants to go check out what D3 or D Cubed is doing, feel free to check it out at d3dm.com. Today, my guest on the podcast is Jeffrey Whitford. Jeffrey serves as the head of sustainability and social business innovation at life science business of Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Don, thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And, really I'm looking forward to this interview. I mean, and we typically don't talk a lot about sustainability on my podcast. And so I think there's just some great topics that we'll get into. I do want to open it up for you to just share with the listeners a little bit about yourself. But one of the stories that I heard about that I do want to get into after your introduction is that you bought snake venom from somebody in Louisiana. So I do want to hop into that as well. So feel free to just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I can't say that the sciences was where I thought I would be. I went to school and got a degree in journalism, of all things. So I have a degree in specifically in advertising from the University of Missouri J School. So I thought I would go work at an agency and be doing creative things. But what I realized was my creativity was going to be put to work in a different fashion, in a totally different environment than what I had anticipated. I graduated from the J School and was looking for jobs, and it was still kind of on the back end of 9/11, and that part of the market wasn't exactly great. And I ended up getting a call to see if I wanted to do an internship for this company called Sigma Aldrich. I had no clue what Sigma Aldrich was, and then when I did a little internet research, I was like, I don't know if that's exactly what I wanted to do. But one of the, one of the best memories, I remember talking to my parents about this, and my dad said, you've got two choices. You can either ask people if they like fries with that, or you can go to St. Louis and do that internship. And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to St. Louis. So I packed up, I moved to St. Louis, and I started proofreading the Sigma Aldrich catalog. That was the main kind of important part of what this internship was about. And if some people remember the Sigma Aldrich catalog, it was about a 3,000 page catalog with not everything that they sold, but with a lot of information and really more of a reference to scientists than it was necessarily a catalog that you would order from, but really a reference point. And I spent day in and day out looking at pages to make sure that everything looked good and going through, about half of that catalog, because there was another intern with me, in a 3-month period. And at the end of that, they asked if I would be interested in joining full-time in their marketing communications department. And I was like, yeah, this is a job. I liked who I worked with. I was like, I don't necessarily know if I like science, but this will work. And so that started what I would never have imagined got me to where I am today. I worked for the exact same company my entire, I think now 18 years of employment, changed through an acquisition in 2015. But what I really came to find out was, well, I am not a scientist by nature. I am leaning into being a scientist through time and through the incredible possibilities that are possible with science. And figuring out now as I transitioned through that element of starting in marketing communications to sustainability, which you would also be like, wait a minute, like
Right.
why do we have a person who, was coming up with like ad concepts now talking about very technical aspects like reducing CO2 emissions and green chemistry and single-use plastic recycling for biopharma. It does seem like a leap, but I was fortunate in the time of when I started this, which was really, close to, 14 years ago, that I could learn as things were developing. So I had an advantage just in that sheer moment of time to where I really got to practice on the job, which has led me to a remarkable place with a remarkable team who are really doing not only industry leading things, but I would say just across the board in the space of business, really remarkable integration of sustainability into the business as a whole. So we find ourselves in a really surprising place if you think about my origin stories from where I started to where I am now.
Well, you really think also though about how many of those catalogs were probably sent out and how many trees that impacted as well. I mean, it comes back to where you are, today as well. I do find it interesting though that the steps in your career, led you to this point. And there have been other times where we've sort of reflected on the name of the podcast, right? So the Life Science Success is the name of the podcast. And whenever I think of the journey that everybody in life sciences takes, that's sort of what makes it successful, right? So hopefully we're, building better drugs and we're impacting humanity and things like that. But also we're doing it, in a sustainable way. And so, I just think about your journey being a part of, that success as well. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the things I'm thinking about that is also not even knowing or recognizing when things are happening that are going to build to the future things that you don't know are waiting in the wings, right? I really actually started in this role 6 months into starting at the company when they asked me if I wanted to help with the community stuff. And that's really how all of this started, was building a foothold in kind of social sustainability. 6 months in, that then created this opportunity that then launched into what would become the focus of my career.
Yeah, it opens up another doorway for me as well that, you should always keep in mind that there's opportunities to pivot lots of different ways. And had you said no to that one opportunity, just think, it could have completely changed the direction that you wound up in life as well.
I think you're exactly right. Being present in these moments and understanding when these doors open, and just being ready for a moment that you may not be comfortable with, you may not be ready for, but it can be the kind of beginning point of something really remarkable.
Yeah, I agree. So I mentioned in the opening that you bought snake venom from somebody. So can you tell us just a little bit more about that story as well?
Yeah. So after I did some time in marketing communications, they asked me to do a rotation in procurement. And I honestly thought that was kind of like the end of like my life. Cause I was like, I definitely like science was a stretch, but like buying scientific things is even further of a stretch. I didn't love the process of negotiation. I didn't love like the cost pressure component. But what happened, and once again, going to that, you never know what this is going to do for you, or what is going to prepare you for it, was that this prepared me to really understand how our business actually worked. So I got to understand some process kind of nuts and bolts of this combination for us, which is we distribute some things, but we're also manufacturers of a significant amount of our portfolio. And we need a lot of different raw materials to make this portfolio of more than 300,000 products available to our customers. And so I got a certain category to buy. And one of those things that was included in that category was snake venom. And I bought it from a man in Louisiana, one of the most random things that I can ever say I've been a purchaser of. But it starts to open your mind up to challenges once again in that moment that I wouldn't have realized later on. But now, as I think about things like How do you think about supply chain emissions and engaging suppliers and getting them on board and helping them with the transitions that we need them to make? That aspect of buying snake venom now becomes extremely beneficial in putting myself in the shoes of those people that I worked with to help them understand the importance of it and the tools that we can help them with, because they're not me, right? They're not a leader of sustainability. In a lot of small companies, and we'll take a different example than the man who we bought snake venom from. But let's say you've got a small company. Typically, the person who's responsible for sustainability is also the person who's getting the things off of the docks. So when shipments come in, who's also the person paying the electrical bill, who's also the person changing out the light bulbs, who is also then expected to be the sustainability person. And so you can understand how when someone like us rolls up to your door and is like, we need these 18 things about this, this, and this, and you're like, I don't even know what half those words mean. This could be a problem, right? But I think it puts me in a different context of how do I have empathy and understanding for those people that helps us help them along this journey so that it's mutually beneficial. We can help identify opportunities for them and give them access to tools that they may not have, that we definitely have, so that we ease this transition for all of us, because that is a challenging component that we all have to work through collectively. And it can't be just something that an individual does and we leave other people behind.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely important. I guess the one other thing that comes to mind for me is do you feel like your education in journalism, also helps with the communication you have to do and thinking through that full process of like, what exactly would it be like to be the recipient of this thing, that now all of a sudden they're having to go do the 18 things?
Yeah, without question, I would consider it one of my silver bullets. If you're thinking about the ways that I differentiate and what I bring to the table, it does bring a fuller package, right? Because I'm not necessarily reliant on another team to help us figure out what are we going to try to say or how do we frame this to that person. you know, I can bring that experience to bear and then bring that creative side as well. Because I think when you're able to marry all of those elements together in a really differentiated, remarkable, interesting way, it becomes that much more compelling for people to get involved. So I really pull on that background that I have that wasn't necessarily intended for this to make my work in this better and stronger.
Yeah, absolutely critical. So I mean, I would imagine that being the head of life sciences in sustainability, I would imagine that you have a tough job because a lot of the things that we do are not very friendly, to the environment. Um, so what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced?
I think one of the things that is almost counterintuitive to what you would think about scientists is that they are tasked with solving some of the toughest problems and coming up with ways to, address things like cancer, disease. There's so many issues that scientists are working on. And their whole thing is to kind of break and change and come up with solutions. But what we have identified is that where scientists don't like to change are these basic entry level things that they've been taught, back when they were in school, and they just keep doing those same things. And the problem is, if you keep doing those same things, the footprint doesn't change. We don't decrease the footprint of science or the impact of the scientific research community. And this is exactly what has to be on the forefront in terms of as we're thinking about what needs to be different. Scientific education becomes a key component. As I have been, pounding the pavement over the years and having conversations with academic institutions, large pharma companies, biotechs, industrial companies, we would talk about sustainability and here are the things you can do. And here's, a portfolio of things that you can choose from. But we didn't see necessarily a lot of traction on implementing those things. And it came back to, I know that methodology works. So why am I going to change something that works when I've got a bigger issue to solve over here, which is how do I knock out that gene to then mitigate that disease from coming to bear? And so you can understand why there is a deprioritization of messing with those basic things. And so the thing that I have really turned my eye towards is, one, how do we think about education in a different fashion to where we're inclusive of green chemistry in chemistry? So it isn't there's green chemistry over here and then there's chemistry over here, but they actually are just the same thing, right? It's not that green chemistry is the special thing. It's just a part of chemistry, and we do that chemistry differently so that we're integrating it into what students are teaching. Because once you can, like I think about it, like if you change the faucet and you fix the faucet, everything that comes out of the faucet is then different. But if you still have a faucet that's, it's not working as it should, everything can be affected accordingly. And so if we can change out these faucets, institutions, not changing the actual teachers, but having those teachers, those professors integrate this type of teaching and this type of thought into their curriculum, it has a fundamental impact for this next generation of students coming into the workforce, coming into academia, who are going to implement that into their work, and then you see it multiply. And this kind of multiplication impact is really where I see a significant amount of untapped change that is right in front of us.
Yeah, it's so important because as I've done quality work as well as process work, one of the things that I've oftentimes done with teams is, the more that we sort of integrate the process change just directly in your flow, so that you can't revert back, make it a natural part of the process. It then leads to the next step of improvement so that you're not, sort of thinking about the past and the way that things used to be. And that's what I sort of extract from what you just said, as well as that, having people, learn this in school, and then carry that forward. Yes, it's important, but also having the fundamental base of the lab be changed so that it's more eco-friendly, makes a lot of sense. One of the terms that you just mentioned a second ago was green science, and I just would like for you to just have you just tell us a little bit more about what that is and how does that sort of come to bear, I guess, in what you work on a daily basis.
Absolutely. So one of the, I would say, kind of founding principles that we worked off of years ago was the work of Doctors John Warner and Paul Anastas. And they are considered kind of the fathers of the green chemistry movement. And if you think back to kind of that time in the 90s, nobody was really talking about this at that scale. So this was really, it is groundbreaking then and groundbreaking now. It's certainly become more normalized and more people are engaging with it. But that work was really the beginning point of thinking about, well, how is this framework something that you can operationalize? And that's really how I looked at it, was take something that was theoretical, it was guidance for people, it gave them, things that they could go do, and operationalize that. And that component of thinking about sustainability within the sciences is really, for me, about moving from the big ideas to how do you quantify things? Because I think that becomes the challenge that we face when we talk about sustainability in practice in different things, whether that's biology, chemistry, whatever nook or cranny you sit in within the bigger, broader science community. We don't want to alienate anybody. But the ability to then take that a step further and add quantification to it, because the quantification starts to get you to the point, and kind of tying back into what you were saying just before, that when we start the process of thinking about it and start evaluating it, we raise more questions. And the questions lead us to say, well, what evidence do we have that helps us support that thesis or that hypothesis? And this is where you get into things like quantification. And that can be a variety of things. whether that is something like the CO2 footprint of products, which that is an area that we're focusing on, so that we can give scientists an understanding of what the impact of that element is. But then you understand, to make life complicated, it's not just that. It could be things like hazard. It could be things like waste generation. There are so many different elements. And this is where, and I can understand why, it can get overwhelming if you're not in the shoes of a sustainability professional, to say, well, what the heck do I choose? I have no clue, because I've got something over here telling me, well, that's not that bad. But then I've got this over here, which telling me that's not great. And how do I tell? And the best answer is you don't,
Mm,
right? You have to make a choice to say, we're prioritizing this over that because we think that the overall impact of that element is more important than this element. Because I don't think, I certainly am not an absolutist in terms of saying this is the one thing that matters and everything else doesn't matter. Because you could have something that has a low carbon footprint, but could be extremely toxic and hazardous, right? And that doesn't work. And so you have to kind of have this gray zone where you use all of the information and you make a decision and you say, we've taken a look at these four things. And by looking at these four things, we chose C because it performed better on this, worse on that. But overall, we feel like it's going to be the better of the bunch. But it comes back to asking the question and having the quantification to help make those decisions. Because without the numbers, you're reliant on some, questionable marketing, like the world of greenwashing, green hushing. There's a lot of greening that is going on, makes it extremely challenging to actually understand. And that's where the numbers really matter to help make these decisions. So for all of us, it's really asking for more in terms of quantifications and reasonings why these things are considered that, so we can make more informed decisions that help us make better choices.
yeah, and if I go back to something that you said a minute ago, right, we really want the scientists to be focused on their next cancer drug, their next this or that, and having somebody else, kind of making those decisions, right? So what is the best way to go in terms of this, and having a separate part of the organization thinking about this, I think is extremely, smart, because, to put that back on, let's say the scientist that also supposed to be thinking about the cancer drug, just seems like, they would be using, their mind potentially for things, and making decisions on something that, frankly, they don't have expertise in. So, yeah.
Absolutely. This, to me, really, and our role is providing those scientists with a complete portfolio of choices so they don't have to compromise. They can still achieve the work that they need to do while also minimizing or mitigating the environmental footprint, the social impact of the products that they are using. And I would agree with you 100%. We need to keep those brilliant minds focused on the solving of these really nasty things. And we, in our roles, we need people to step up to the plate, to give these options, to bring new developments and discoveries to the marketplace so that they can do that. And we can see a transformation in terms of outcomes.
One of the things that your bio also mentions is that you're responsible for social responsibility. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your focus is there?
Yeah, one of the early components and one of the early books that I read was really around the triple bottom line. So this is was a theory about the environmental, the social, and the kind of the physical aspects of sustainability and how they were really intertwined. And that helped with the build out of how we actually structured the work that we did, so that we grouped all of these elements together and we had responsibility for that portfolio of components. And so the social sustainability aspects come across in multiple fashions. One, you've got the investments that we make into our communities around the world. So as an organization, we focus on two areas: scientific education, so bringing access to high quality science education to underserved populations who don't have access to hands-on science. So getting them that, as well as expanding access to science globally. So thinking specifically about developing countries that do not have advanced or as well-developed scientific environments in those countries. And so we think about it as one way. To give you an example of what that looks in practicality, we've thought about science education engagement kind of in a couple of buckets. We've got one, direct investments that we make with places like science centers. So really leading edge science centers who are doing really interesting hands-on work and really bringing students into their walls at either no or very low cost to those school districts, so that they can experience and have those wow moments and experience the cool parts of science, right? It's not all the pieces that made me scared of science from a very early age, right? We want to make it so they understand that interest, and we want to make sure it's inclusive. But then you have things like teacher preparation. So how do we prepare those teachers in middle school, high school, and elementary schools to be able to integrate new methodologies for teaching science so that everyone understands science is for everyone? It's remarkable the unintended consequences of some practices that kind of seep in and you don't even expect it or see it, but you then create this kind of exclusionary environment for certain populations. Girls, students of color, suddenly find themselves not included. It really became, it's very interesting, and it is starting to shift. We are starting to see this, but we ask students what they think a scientist is. And invariably, it always comes out, it's a crazy old guy with crazy hair, and he's white, right? It's Einstein. That's what it is. But we are starting to see this shift of identification from students. And that's a remarkable thing to see because, once again, the thesis is you're a scientist. I'm a scientist. Everyone is a scientist. We may not be a formal scientist, but we're all scientists in one way, shape, or the other. And getting students to realize that knocks out one barrier. Then we go into kind of owned programs. So we have a platform, a curiosity platform, if you will, that focuses in on high quality hands-on science. We have a mobile science lab that is in a shipping container that has been transformed to a mobile science lab that traverses all around the United States and in Europe. I shouldn't forget Canada. It does make a stop in Toronto. But we expanded into Europe last year. We're expanding into India this year. And over the next several years, we're going to be putting a Curiosity Cube on every continent in the world, minus Antarctica, to increase access to hands-on science to these communities who don't have it. And that is, this higher touch, faster kind of engagement, kind of spark moment. And then we move into a deeper engagement through Curiosity Labs. And this is where our own scientists go into schools and spend 2 days at those schools and work through an entire grade level. So I'll use a very US context example here. But let's say they go to middle school and they visit a 6th grade class. They're actually going to work with all of the 6th graders that go through that science class as they cycle through. So we could be there for 2 days doing a deep dive experiment on chemiluminescence. And what makes chemiluminescence happen? What is that principle? And really, it's about inquiry-based learning. So we use the best practices of how curriculum is built. So it is just like they would expect to get from their teacher. So we work with Washington University in St. Louis to develop that. So high quality content. It's not just some corporate people coming up with some nonsense and being like, here you go. But that real focus on things that educators can look at and say, I see how I can integrate that into my curriculum, my lesson planning. That is a really important aspect of making sure that the investments we're making are meaningful and beneficial for these communities. And then you have, I'll call it one big other way that we think about the social sustainability aspect, which is everything related to things like supply chain. And this comes to things like diversity, equity, inclusion within the supply chain. It comes into things like modern slavery, equal pay, biodiversity, You can go on and on. Conflict minerals, Nagoya Protocol. There are so many things get lumped in this category. At times can be overwhelming. But this is also thinking about other aspects that contribute to kind of our societal makeup that we may not be thinking about, so that we can be very clear about the ways that we're contributing and ensuring that our business is operating at high levels of exceeding kind of compliance components by voluntarily engaging more deeply to make sure that the supply chain that we're operating is making really wise choices in who we partner with. Those people are paying fair wages, that those workers are being treated well, that they're advancing gender equity, diversity within their organizations. So that's when I look and think about social sustainability, I'm thinking about it in a very broad context, but hopefully you can also see very specific investments that we're making to then pull that out and really bring it to the forefront.
Yeah, we talk a lot on the podcast as well about, just diversity and inclusion, even in terms of clinical trials. So we kind of take a different approach oftentimes with a lot of the individuals that come through. And the one thing that I know sort of led me to the place that I am now is just you mentioned Spark, and I know that, more or less has to do with, the program that you have as well. But the spark that I had in school that led to, hey, I want to go do this thing professionally, right? And then those moments are essentially, really important moments for any student anywhere as well. Just to have those moments where you just go, man, number one, I get it, and I love where this is going to go, right? So, I think we all had those moments in school.
And what I love about that is that my branding heart is like warm and exploding, because that's exactly when you think about branding, it brings out this emotion for you. And what you just described is exactly what we hope to do with this entire thing. So from a brand perspective, it
Yeah.
captures this essence of what we're trying to create and reinforces it. But you're exactly right. And those stories, and I think what's really remarkable, and one of the pieces that I love most about my job, like there are so many, I am so fortunate in terms of what I get to do, who I get to do it with. But one of the best moments is when I am out with our teams at the Curiosity Cube, doing a Curiosity Lab, any of the other volunteer projects. You can see the moment, and that's what's remarkable to me. You can see the moment when these dots connect in children's minds, and you see it actually light up. You see that spark happen. And that moment is something that I can tell you I never get sick of. And I am always like rejuvenated when I see it happen, because it's a sign that what we're doing is working and that it's meaningful. And it's something that you can take any of these programs and you can go to leadership and they're like, yeah, we need to be conservative. The financial environment is all over the place.
Yep.
They participate in things like this and they're like, we get that. We can't do that one in, right? We understand why we need to keep doing that because they see it. And I think that is such a valuable aspect to remember and remind ourselves. We all have that moment. And if we can help kids to have it earlier and more consistently, just imagine what can happen if you get more people into this solving pool to deal with some of these issues that have been with us for so long.
Yeah, and there's so many people that sort of look at that 18, 19-year-old person and say, how can you possibly make a decision about your future? But the reality is, if they had had those sort of big spark moments, they probably would have already made that decision long before they even get to sort of the end of high school, coming into college, time period as well. So, I think it is absolutely critical.
Absolutely. And the research shows us that students make that decision. They have to, that spark moment needs to happen between the ages of 10 and 14. If they have it happen in there, they're significantly more likely to go into a STEM career because their confidence is not thwarted at that time. And that's such an important kind of research base that guides our work. That's where we focus, because we know that, to your point, if they have it earlier and it's meaningful, it really reinforces their ability to go kind of full force into making a decision about a STEM career, which could be transformational.
Absolutely. So, Jeffrey, there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
I am a sponge. And so literally everything that I come into interaction with is really a source of inspiration. It can be, for me, I love a healthy walk. I've branded it a healthy walk. It's just walking, but I've turned it into a feel good health activity, but it's also my creative kind of creative force. But I just soak up so many things. I am a huge lover of television. I know it's probably horrible for me and rotting my brain, but like I ultimately connect dots from everything around me and think about what is the application within my world. And so really everything that around me becomes a source of inspiration and creativity.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. What concerns you?
Phew, I don't know if we've got enough time for that one. Um, you know, I I get more and more concerned when I see us get further away from remembering we're all humans. We all make mistakes. But at the end of the day, it should be less about politics. It should be less about financially getting ahead. It should be less about all these and remembering that for us to be successful, it is not about a culture of scarcity, but it is a culture of abundance and that there's plenty for all of us to have. And when we're more inclusive in that, a lot of the problems that I think we're dealing with wouldn't be as problematic. So I'm hopeful that we can be more mindful of one another as humans and more empathetic and more loving.
Yeah, I love that as well because they're just it's interesting to me because somebody had said to me a while back that sometimes whenever you see people do things and you sort of wonder, well, why would you do that? Maybe they were having an off day, or maybe there was something else that was going on in their life that, and it just made me sort of consider something more. But again, it's this whole thing, same thing that you have to do with diversity and inclusion all the time. It's about sort of broadening your view of the world and sort of considering another perspective as well, and just being accepting of the fact that we are different human beings.
Absolutely. And I think to that point, it is also that aspect of asking questions because sometimes, you I don't know if it's fear of diving in a bit deeper, um, maybe feeling like it isn't our place. But sometimes I think that example that you had, maybe somebody just needs somebody to talk to. And
Mm,
you asking that question, be like, hey, something seems off. And like, I just want to throw that out there. If like you need somebody to talk to, it's amazing what that does to help you understand if something is going on that has totally thrown off how someone would normally act. And you're like, something feels weird.
right.
And taking that cue from your gut to just ask a question. I think one of the things that I have been um, pushing myself to do more is to stop and ask more questions rather than just assume I understand it and push through and just go on to the next thing. And it is really remarkable what you then start to find out as a part of the process.
Yeah, having a beginner's mind is not an easy thing to do for a lot of us as well. And I'm pointing at myself whenever I'm saying that, as well, that I have to sort of, oftentimes go back to that, how do I sort of dive a little bit deeper, make sure that I understand a little bit more.
Yeah.
Last question, what excites you?
There are no shortage of things that excite me. I am looking around and I think about what we're doing from a work perspective, and there are just some remarkable things happening and new solutions that you wouldn't expect that are solving some problems that are pretty vexing. That I mean, they create more problems, so that's not like we're all done. But you start to see this change happening. And for things that I thought, man, just going to take forever, the cycles seem to be shortening a little bit. And that's exciting to me to see this go from, and I joke about this, but I used to have to like really knock on people's doors to get them to like allocate 30 minutes to talk to me. And now we are like the popular kids on playground. And I'm like, can I go back to being the one nobody paid attention to? But you realize the importance of that transition. And like our organization went through a strategic review in 2021, and this was a priority. And so last year, we spent kind of a year getting ourselves geared up, putting people in places, getting systems set. And it was some transformational things that went down. And now we're starting to see the benefits, but the expectations are even higher. And the permission is there to do more,
That's
to
good.
bring big. And what more can you ask for? I am very fortunate in terms of I have a remarkable team. It is a remarkable size of team. But our goal is not to be this kingdom that just is insulated from sustainability, but it's about driving it into the business. And that is a remarkable place to be. So I'm excited to see how we continue to drive this forward and really hopefully continue to be an industry leader within the sustainability space.
It's so important. If people want to learn more about you or learn more about what you're doing, where are the best places that they could go?
So certainly our website is chock full of great information. We keep it up to date. So you see those updates. So it's sigmalters.com/greener. So that's one place you can go. And certainly my LinkedIn, I try to be fairly active with updates about the different projects and just bringing to light kind of the behind the scenes look of the things that we're doing. So, once again, it comes back to quantification, and I try to quantify things in my posts so that it's not kind of fluffy. You are really seeing what this means in terms of impact as we make changes, but to visualize it so it's not just this kind of, I don't know what's really going on. You specifically can see it, but it's hopefully an accurate, honest portrayal of the good and the bad, because we are also just as keen to say where we've not met expectations or where there's improvements that need to be made. So hopefully it's a refreshing view with a new version of radical transparency.
Very good. Well, Jeffrey Whitford, I wanted to thank you for being here on the Life Science Success Podcast and being a guest with me. I greatly appreciated our conversation. And like I said, this is new for me. A lot of these areas, I hope that people will dive in a little bit deeper with you as well.
Well, I appreciate you creating the space for this conversation about sustainability within the sciences. So thank you for that. And thank you for letting me spend the time with you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.